Hello, my name is Michael with the Route Hub training program, and I'll be walking you through the entire process for deploying the Cisco ASA Firewall using only the Azm interface. So definitely reference the network diagram in your package for all the necessary details that we'll be using for our configuration. This includes the networks that we're going to set up, which includes our LAN, our guest, and our DMZ network. This will include what IP addresses that will be configured to even the Vlan tags and how things will be connected in our environment. So we're using the Cisco ASA 5505 model, and the default IP address that's configured on this firewall is a 192.168.1.1 IP address. So basically, once you buy this firewall, you take it out of the box and you plug it in. That's the default IP that you can use to initially access the firewall. So right now we have our computer that is plugged into port number 2 on our firewall, and we have configured a temporary IP address on our computer that will allow us to access the firewall for the very first time. So let's start our video series by first showing you how to initially access our ASA firewall. So let's show you very quickly the IP that we have configured on our computer. So we're going to show you that now. Type in the network here. So .10 is configured on our computer. Remember, .1 is our firewall. So we should be able to ping our firewall right now since it's connected and powered on. And it is pingable. Great. So now let's go ahead and move this aside and plug in that IP into our web browser. Great, we're connected. Let's continue. Now keep in mind that there is no username or password, so we're going to only click on OK to continue. And let's go and refresh the page again. Great. So this is basically what we see, the Cisco Azm 5.2. Now this is an old version, but no worries, we're going to be showing you how to upgrade the software. This is the OS and the Azm image on the Cisco firewall, ASA firewall. So we have two options here how we can access the Azm page. The first is we can either install the Asdm launcher. This is a local application we can install and use. So definitely do that if, well, you'll be administrating a firewall very often for your environment. Or you can run just the Asdm Applet. So this is actually a Java applet, so Java must be installed. So I do this a lot for a lot of my clients that when I access their firewalls using the Asdm, always run the Asdm Applet. But you need to make sure that you have Java installed, the latest installed. If not, you're going to encounter a lot of weird issues. So make sure that you have the latest version of Java installed. So in our case, we're going to just first start off with running the Asdm Applet to show you what the Azm page looks like and all the bells and whistles there. So basically here we're going to click on Run Asdm Applet. So now I'm starting to launch and load Asdm here. Java should come up soon. We're going to say OK. Remember, there's no username or password. For this particular message here, block potentially unsafe components from being run. We're going to say no. Still loading. Oops. And now here's what the Azm page looks like. So a lot of things happening here. So first, basically, you see that within the dashboard here, we can see a lot of system resources in terms of CPU, the memory, even the amount of connections that are coming through, whether they're TCP, UDP, even the amount of traffic coming in that are being input or output type traffic in kilobits per second. Very good. Here on the interface status, you can see details of all interfaces configured, the IP address and their state, whether they're up, even the amount of traffic on those interfaces. Very good for very quick troubleshooting to see what interfaces are up or not up. Here, of course, you see VPN tunnels. You can see the number of VPN tunnels that are up for IPsec or for SSL VPN, which is the web VPN or the SVC. This will kind of change somewhat when we upgrade the Azm version on our ASA firewall. Now here under general though, you see details of the default host name. You see the default or the current ASA operating system version, which is 7.24, and the Azm version of 5.2. You see the firewall mode, which is in routed mode, not transparent mode, so you see that. Of course, you see the amount of memory we have in terms of flash and our RAM here, and of course, even the uptime. and you see our device model of 5505. So very useful information just on the dashboard for very quick information on the operational state or general information of our firewall for the most part. So very good information here. So basically here we can do a lot of things. So under license here, you see other kind of stuff that it basically means what we're licensed to do. So you see that we have triple DES and ES encryption. That's what's licensed on our firewall. It supports active standby failovers, supports 20 VLANs. We have the Security Plus bundle installed. It supports 2 VPN or 2 SSL VPN users, but 25 VPN peers. You can kind of see that the default, we get more VPN peers compared to SSL, and this is pretty much out of the box. In terms of user counts, we have the unlimited version of our ASA 5505, and of course other details here that pertains to the license installed. That's pretty much based on the Security Plus that we have installed on our 5505 model. So it's good to see that information. We can enable logging here, which is very useful for looking at events that are going on for troubleshooting purposes. So this will be very useful. Some other things we can do here is under configuration. This is basically where you'll go to configure the firewall for all kind of aspects in terms of the NATs, the firewall policies, to routing, even VPN. So this is where we'll be spending majority of our time to configure a lot of the aspects on our Cisco ASA firewall. So that's that section there. Under monitoring, this is where we can monitor basically all types of things in regards to the ARP table, the DCP table, the VPN sessions, and other logging kind of details here. So we'll be going here for some particular videos in our series. Here for the menu bar, under wizards, this is where we can do a lot of different wizards here. We can actually use the VPN Wizard for configuring site or client VPNs. We'll be doing this in our video series. So this is basically where you can definitely see that listed there. Under tools, we'll be discussing some of these tools listed here, like the packet tracer, the ping, the trace route, doing upgrade software, reloading. We'll be showing you these different tools for different videos in this series. Options is nothing much. That's where you can add particular thing for preferences. And basically, that's really it. So this is kind of a quick overview of the Cisco ASDM and how to initially access the Cisco ASA firewall, ready for us to start doing the configuration that will be shown in this video series. In this video, we're going to show you how to configure interfaces on the ASA firewall for different VLAN tags. So this is where the fun will begin. So definitely follow the network diagram that's present in your package for all the necessary details, such as the subnet, the types of networks we will configure, which is our LAN, guest, even our DMZ, the IP addresses that will be configured for those networks, and the VLAN tag that will be configured for those networks, including where things will be connected to within our environment. So to configure our interfaces, we can simply first go to configuration. That's the first step. Now here reflects all the default interfaces in our environment. Basically, inside is connecting towards the LAN. This is how we're accessing the ASA now through the ASDM. And of course, the outside will connect towards the internet. Now we'll be changing these interfaces to reflect more of our own environment, to kind of give you an idea how this can be configured. So basically, these are the defaults. And we want to go to edit for our inside. So this is what that looks like for any interface that is added. You see the particular IP address and mask that's configured on that interface. You can also get its IP via DCP or even PPPoE if it's a WAN facing interface. We see the name that we're calling this interface, which is called inside. It could be any name you want, and you will see that with our own configuration. You see the actual security level and even which ports are assigned to this particular network, which is the inside network, which is assigned basically to ports 1, 2, 3, 4, pretty much all ports except port number 0. Port number 0 is used for the outside interface. When we click on the Advanced tab, for example, here, you'll see details with the MTU that we could change. Not recommended, but if it needs to be changed, this is where you could go. And the VLAN tag. So basically, these are what we can actually configure for an interface on the ASA firewall. So let's first remove port number 1 from the selected switch ports for this inside network. Let's remove that, because port 1 is what we're going to use for connecting into our network for those 3 VLAN tags, or for those 3 networks, the LAN, the guest, and the DMZ. So we want to actually remove that from this inside interface, since we'll be now starting to do the configuration to match our environment. So once we've done that, we can say OK. Now let's start the configuration of our environment. First, go to switch ports. So these are all the ports on the ASA firewall. So we know that port 0 will plug in towards our untrusted network, the internet. And port 1 will plug into our core. So let's select that and go to edit, which is here. Now we're going to basically specify that this will be a trunk port or a trunk interface. And we're going to specify all the Vlan tags that will be associated for this interface, which would be Vlan 10 for our LAN, 181 for our guest, and 182 for our DMZ. Once we're done, we'll say OK. Now let's go to interfaces and let's add a new interface, starting with our LAN interface. Now, we're going to select port number 1 as a selected port. For the interface name, we're going to call this something unique. We're going to call this RHG for Route Hub Group -LAN. For security level, we're going to say 100. Now what this means is higher the number, the more secure or trusted this network is. So in our case, 100 will be the highest value we're going to assign to our interfaces, which means our LAN is considered as the trusted network in our environment. Now we're going to specify the IP address and mask that's depicted in the network diagram. So we're doing that now, and a class C. Now let's go to advanced, and for the VLAN ID, we're going to specify VLAN 10. Now let's check things out before we say OK. Make sure everything looks correct in terms of the ports, IPs, and everything. Now we're going to add another interface. So again, select port number 1. This will be for our guest network this time. The security level will be 50, so it's not secure, but it's also not trusted. Our WAN interface basically will be using a security level of 0, which means it's completely untrusted in our environment. So we're going to now specify the correct IP and mask for our guest interface. Great. Now we'll go to advanced and specify 181 as the VLAN tag. Check things out and say OK. Great. Now let's add our last interface for our DMZ. So port 1 again. I'm going to call this RG DMZ. Have a higher security level compared to our guests, and input the appropriate IP and mask. Let's go to our advanced tab, and the VLAN tag is 182. Check things out one more time, and we're done. All interfaces are now added. Just check things out one more time. Good, everything is configured. So let's say apply the changes now. Now interfaces are added. Now when you go to the next step here, let's wait until this actually finishes delivering those commands to the firewall before we continue. Great. Now let's go down to properties and go to device access and go down to HTTPS Asdm, which is here. And we're going to go to add, and we're going to select our LAN interface and the network for that, which is 10.67.78.0 with a class C mask. Now we're doing this for a reason, because basically right now we are kind of plugged in using all the default kind of values, like our laptop's kind of plugged in. That allows us to manage the ASA using this default IP address of 192.168.1.1 and using the default interface name of inside. So right now the port number 1 is not yet plugged into our switch. So we need to kind of make sure that when we start changing over the network, and that when we manage or go into the Asdm using the new IP, which is 10.67.78.180, if you remember that, we configured that as one of the interfaces, that we are allowed to access the Asdm. So we basically need to allow that particular access. So we're specifying this actual network of 10.67.78.0 that will allow us to access the Asdm once we start plugging in all the connections to our network. So once that actually looks good, that's the port that will be used, no big deal for that, and now we can say apply. Fantastic. So now let's go to home. And here, of course, you see that all of our interfaces for LAN, guest, and DMZ are down. Because remember, port 1 is not yet plugged into our environment yet. Only the inside interface is plugged in, which is allowing us to access the ASA firewall to configure these interfaces that are necessary. Now, once that is actually configured, we're going to go to our core switch and configure the switch port that the ASA will be plugged into. So we're going to go and log in here. We'll go to port 8 on our core switch. We're going to specify the Vlan tags that will be allowed on this port, which is VLANs 10, 181, and 182. And the rest are kind of like default ports, which are or different VLAN tags which are required. So you see that for VLAN 1, 2, and 1002 to 1005. We have to include those. But more importantly, though, 10, 181, and 182 are definitely required. We need to make sure that we add those tags in there to be allowed. And of course, we're going to specify that this will be a trunk port. And we're done here. So let's go ahead and save this configuration. So we're done with the core. Now let's start to plug in devices. Now we're going to unplug our inside interface and plug in the new LAN interface with the VLAN tags. Great, so our inside is unplugged, so basically it's not pingable, which means the Azm is going to start timing out pretty soon. Let's confirm we can ping the new IP for the ASA on the LAN interface, which is .180. It's going to take some time for them to kind of come up, so we'll be patient. Great, and the ASA is now pingable for that LAN interface that we configured. So our Asdm here is still showing the old IP address, so it kind of got disconnected here. That's perfectly normal. So what we need to do here, of course, is we need to kind of close out the Asdm. So let's bring up this particular window here. There it is. And let's go ahead and close this. Yes. And basically it's closed out. So now let's go back to a web browser and put in the new IP, which is 10.67.78.180. Great, we're connected. And let's go ahead and run the Asdm app. Let's log in. Perfect, so now we're back. We're logged on to our Asdm using the new IP address that's configured in our environment now. And of course, now you see all of our interfaces for LAN, guest, and DMZ are up. The inside is down now. This is completely disconnected. So basically at this point here, that we're going to continue with the rest of our configuration on the ASA firewall, but this is basically how you can add interfaces on the ASA firewall and associate a VLAN tag to those interfaces, and including the necessary configuration that's needed on the core switch to make this happen. In this video, we're going to do some very basic configuration on our ASA firewall that will include items like adding a NTP server to changing the host name from the default to reflect what is more of our environment. So keep in mind that whatever we do or configure on the ASA firewall or on your ASA firewall, of course, keep in mind that you need to save the changes to the flash. So under File, Save Running Config to Flash. Make sure you do that. Because basically what's going to happen is if your firewall reboots, the changes are not going to be kept. So make sure that you definitely do that. Now, on to our basic configuration. So let's go to Configuration, go down to Properties, and let's extend Device Administration. Starting with clock. First, we need to specify our appropriate time zone, which in our case would be Pacific time zone. This is GMT -8. Make sure everything looks correct here and say Apply. Great. Moving down to device, we're going to specify our ASA host name, which we will call EFW for Edge Firewall 01. Our domain name, we'll call this routehub.local, which basically is a private domain that we're going to use within our environment. Let's say Apply. Great. Now let's go down to NTP. Let's add an NTP server that the firewall will use. The IP will be 10.67.78.1, our core router, say preferred, that exists off of the LAN interface. And let's say OK, and then apply. Next, we'll go down to password. And here we're going to specify the password to use to log on to Asdm. Now let's click on apply. Now let's go to user accounts. Well, let's go ahead and log in here. Basically, once we made a change to our password, it's telling us to log back in, which is perfectly normal. So now we're logged back in. Let's move this aside. And now we're going to add a user account into the ASA firewall. These are local user accounts. They can be used for logging on to the Asdm, or even it can be used for VPN access, for like VPN user accounts. But we're going to add an account that we use for basically logging on to the Asdm. So we go to add a new account. It's here. Our username, we're going to call this admin. And we're going to specify our password and of course confirm it. Next, we're going to check this box here, and for the privilege level, we're going to choose the highest possible, which is 15. And then we'll say OK. Next, we will apply the changes. So we're done here in terms of device administration. Now let's go to device access. So here under AAA access, we're going to select, here it is, HTTP Asdm. That basically wants to log on to the Asdm using the local accounts, which means our admin account. So that's selected, and then basically we're going to go down and apply. Great. So now once that is completed, then what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to home, and you see that the name has been changed now. So it says basically our EFW01 routehub.local. So you see that present there. So now let's go ahead and save. Now it's prompted us to log on. So this time we're going to type in our user account, which is admin, and our password, since we specified local authentication to the Asdm now. So that is some examples of some very basic configuration on the ASA firewall before we get down to some of the more critical components of some of the services like VPN, client or site, to disabling, to using other kind of security services on our firewall appliance. In this video, we're going to show you how to do a software upgrade on the ASA firewall. Now this includes the operating system of the ASA, but also the Asdm image, which goes along with it. So the first thing we definitely need to obtain, obviously, is the software, the ASA OS image and the Asdm image. Now you can get all this from Cisco.com, but you must have a valid CCO account to download the software. So if you have a SmartNet account that allows you to download, make sure that you're logged onto the site, and we're going to show you how you can download the images that are required. So we're logged in now, and here we'll go to support. We'll go to download software. We'll go to products, security. Then we'll go to firewall appliances, and then the first link, ASA 5500 series. Next, we will select the firewall model that we are using in our environment, which is the 5505 here at the bottom. And here we can either download the Asdm, which is here, the ASA Device Manager, or the ASA software, the OS, which is here. But let's go ahead and click on the ASA software link. So here we'll reflect all the available software for the ASA firewall, new and the older versions. Over here on the right, basically reflects the most latest. So here reflects the OS image, and here is the Asdm image. Now in our environment, we already downloaded these two particular images on our computer. So for reference, let's quickly show you those files that we have on our computer. So this is the OS file, and that is our Asdm image. So now let's start this software upgrade process. So here, we're going to go to Tools, Upgrade Software. Let's move this in the middle. And for image to upload, we're going to select ASA. Next, we're going to specify the local file path. So let's go ahead and input that information now. And we're going to input the actual name. Just copy this and copy and specify the name, the file name that will be pretty much seen or be used in the flash once it's copied. Once we're done, let's confirm the syntax, everything, and now let's click on upload image. It's going to upload that ASA OS image directly to the flash. Almost done. And now the upload is successful. So let's say OK, and let's repeat the process for the Asdm image this time. So let's select Asdm. We'll specify our local file path. Let's go ahead and copy this, and this will be pretty much the file name that will be seen in the flash memory. Let's click here. Oh, it's already there. Great. And let's go ahead and click on upload image, which should be faster since it's a smaller file. Almost there. And now we have both images successfully uploaded to the flash of our ASA firewall. Now, step number 2. We need to go to configuration, go down to properties here, device administration, and then to boot image configuration. Now this is the current image that is running on the ASA firewall, which is version 8.23. So we want to delete that boot image and specify our new boot image location, which is the 841 code. So say OK. And just do the same for the Azm image location, which is 641, which is here. Let's apply. And let's save the configuration changes to flash. Great. Now we need to reload our ASA firewall. So we'll go to System Reload. And for reload scheduling, we want to actually reboot it now. We can do it based on a delay or at a particular scheduled time, but we want to do it now. Of course, we have different options that we can actually do a cancel reload or just close this out entirely. But we will go ahead and proceed and do schedule reload. We'll say yes, and it'll start to shut down the ASA firewall to reboot it. So now we'll go back and confirm that once the ASA is up and running again, that it shows the new version for the ASA and for the Azm version. Okay, so our ASA firewall has been rebooted, and we have launched our web page again to access the Asdm, and now we see a different version of 641. So far so good. So let's go ahead and launch the Asdm now to confirm the version of the ASA. So we can click on Run Asdm, which is here. We'll go to Yes. We'll click on Run. Let's go ahead and log in. Updating software. And of course loading the current configuration. So now we're logged on to the Asdm, and as you can tell that we're definitely running the new version of the ASA firewall, which reflects an 841. So that shows over here, which is the new pretty much boot image that we want to load on the ASA firewall, and of course the version of the Asdm. So basically we have confirmed and have successfully done an upgrade, a software upgrade of the ASA firewall. In this video, we're going to show you how to configure the WAN interface and add a default gateway. So how do we actually do that? It's very simple. So first we go to configuration, go to interfaces, and here let's select on the outside, the default present. Let's go to edit. Here we're going to change the interface name to reflect our naming standard, which would be RHG-WAN. And of course the security level you see is 0 because this will be our untrusted network. Once we're done with that, we're going to select use static IP address, and we're going to input the correct IP and mask that is depicted and will be used in our environment. and a /29 mask. Great. So once we're done with that, we can click on OK and go ahead and apply those changes. So now our WAN interface is configured. And once that is finished, just finish our cleanup with these interfaces and remove the inside once and for all. We do not need that anymore. Of course, it gives a lot of warnings because, well, obviously the inside interface was configured for a lot of defaults on the firewall. So these warnings are normal, like DCP bindings. That's perfectly fine. So these are our interfaces in our environment: the WAN, LAN, the guest, and our DMZ. So far, so good. So now let's go to routing, static routes, and now we're going to add our default route. So go to add. For the interface is going to be through the WAN interface. The network, we're going to click here and select the kind of the any object representing our internet, and the default gateway. .254, I believe. Yeah. Once that looks good, we can click on OK. Default gateway has been added to our firewall. So now let's make sure that everything is connected correctly. Let's go to ping. And let's ping an IP on the internet, like 4.2.2.2. Very common. And doing that, we're able to ping that IP. So basically, we have configured our ASA correctly with the WAN interface and the default gateway, which is now officially connected to the network, the internet, or the public network. In this video, we're going to show you how to configure DCP on the ASA firewall. And we're going to do this for our guest network. So basically, if I'm a guest user and I come in with my laptop and I plug into the guest network, I will automatically get my IP address from the firewall directly. So how do we set this up? So to do that, we can go to configuration, and under device management, we'll go down to DCP, which is here, and go to DCP server. Now we can select onto our guest network and enable that for DCP services. And then we can define the actual pool of addresses that will be assigned to our guest users. Great. Now we can go ahead and put in other parameters such as our DNS server, even our domain name, and other details like our WIN server and even a lease time. And we're going to say 7 days, which is basically 60,400 seconds. Under advanced, we can have other additional options we can add to this particular scope. And clicking here, we can see all the available options we could use. And some are different numbers. So let's say, for example, we go to option 150. Here I can say that option 150, which is used with voice and unified communication environments. So basically, under the IP address 1, I can specify the IP address of my call manager server, which is 10.67.78.181, and then add that to this particular scope and say OK. So basically what this means is that if our guest user has an actual IP phone that is basically plugged into our guest network, it will use option 150 to try to locate call manager, register, and be able to place and receive phone calls, if that phone is configured in call manager, by the way. But I want to show you different options that you can configure within the actual scope, for this case, for our guest users. So once we're done with our configuration, we can simply click on OK to complete it. Now we can click on Apply, and now DCP has been configured for our guest users on the ASA firewall. Once we have enabled our ASA firewall for DCP for our guest network, let's confirm that it's working. So now we're on our laptop that's plugged into our guest network, and we want to confirm that we are now getting an IP from the firewall. So we can simply open up our DOS prompt very quickly. Type in IP config. Let's move this here so you can see IP config, and let's scroll up towards the top, and there it is. And here is the IP address and the default gateway that is assigned to our computer. So DHCP is working in our environment. So to do a quick test, we should be able to ping our ASA firewall. So we'll ping our default gateway. And doing that, we're able to ping the ASA firewall. In this very quick video, we want to show you how you can monitor and look at the DHCP binding table for what IP address has been assigned to clients on the network. So in our case, in the last video, we plugged in our laptop, part of the guest network, and we got an IP address from the firewall. That IP address was .181.10. So basically, we should be able to see that on the firewall. So we can do that by going to monitoring this time. And under interfaces, we will go to DHCP and then down to the server table. Here we see one entry present. We see this IP address has been assigned. There's one active lease, and this is the IP that is assigned to our laptop. And of course, you see the MAC address, the client ID. So that's the MAC address that we're using on our actual laptop, and when the lease will expire, which is 7 days. We specify that as the lease time during our configuration. Under Dcp Statistics, we can get other details in terms of messages for DHCP, which can be very useful for troubleshooting purposes if needed. So basically, this is how we can monitor DHCP and also look at the leases that are assigned or is leased out on the ASA firewall. In this video, we're going to integrate our Active Directory environment with our ASA firewall using LDAP. We want to do that because we want to allow our remote access solution, which will be SSL VPN and IPsec VPN solution, that will allow our users to log in using their Microsoft or AD credentials. This keeps a centralized user database that can be managed in our environment. So we first need to set up LDAP before that can happen. So it's pretty easy. So first, let's show you quickly our environment for Active Directory for reference. Nothing too fancy here. So here we have our domain controller, which is on Windows 2003 server, and the domain is routehub.local or route hub for the actual domain in our environment. And here you actually will see basically some of the following details. One, we have our users container that has our administrator account that we will use for authenticating with the LDAP server, which is our domain controller. So that is reflected here and shows that particular container. We also have our RHG users, which is an OU that we created where all of our user accounts exist for Duncan Rockwell, Amy Lynn, and even my account for Michael Tomatis. So basically, this is what our environment looks like. And of course, you will see the IP address of the server, which is the .190 that's connected to our LAN. So that's pretty much a very brief overview of our environment, the actual kind of structure of the domain, the containers, the OUs, and all those particular details. So let's go ahead and move this aside and let's start doing the configuration. So here in the configuration, we'll go to Remote Access VPN, and you can see there's different types of remote access solutions we can set up, which we will talk about and do in separate videos. So we'll go ahead and from here, we'll go to AAA local users, and then we'll go down to AAA server groups. Here we're going to go to add. For the server group, we're going to call this RHG-LDAP. For the protocol, we're going to select the protocol of LDAP, of course, which is here. And we're going to click on OK. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to click Add. Now this server exists off of the LAN interface, so we need to specify the correct interface, which is here. Next, we'll put in the IP of our domain controller, which is here, the .190. So I'll put this back, and let's put that IP address now. Great. Now for the server type, we're going to select Microsoft, because this is our environment. For the base DN, we're going to specify the actual LDAP string for our domain, which is routehub local. So we're going to copy and paste that here. So this is the actual LDAP string that represents our domain in our environment. For the scope, we're going to basically select all levels beneath this base DN, which is like our containers, our OU, everything like that. So we can go ahead and just select that. For the naming attribute, this will be using the SAMS account, which basically means like the username, like mtamati or drockwell. Those are the actual user IDs that we use to log on to our computers or email. For the login DN, this would be basically the LDAP string for our admin account, which is located within the user's container. So this represents the actual LDAP string for that account. And we'll put in the password for our administrator. Great, now we're done. So we can click on OK. Let's apply that. Click here, and now let's go ahead and test this out. So we can select that and go to test. We can select authentication, and let's say we'll authenticate using my account. So we'll say mtamati, and I will input my password here. Now let's see if this will be successful. And it is. So basically I'm able to authenticate with my credentials via LDAP from the ASA and authenticating against Active Directory. So basically LDAP integration is successful between AD and our ASA firewall. So basically now we're ready to configure our remote access solutions for SSL VPN and later on our IPsec VPN solution. In this video, we're going to show you how you can enable Telnet or SSH access to the ASA firewall. Now this will be very common for advanced level security engineers that need to administer or troubleshoot the ASA firewall. So this is definitely my preference. I always configure and troubleshoot ASA firewalls using only CLI. So basically from the outside, I SSH directly to the firewall, configure it for VPNs or other kind of troubleshooting, and kind of do it from that perspective. Now, when I'm working with a lot of Microsoft consultants who are managing the ASA firewall, but only through the Asdm, they basically kind of repeat the process of, well, how do I enable SSH access into the firewall? So we're going to show you how you can definitely do that, which is very simple. But we're going to make it even more simpler, and we're going to enable Telnet on the ASA firewall, but can only be accessed from our internal network, from our LAN subnet. So how do we actually do that? So we will go to configuration, go down to device management, and then under management access, we will select the first link here. Great. So far we only have access for or to the Asdm. So there's nothing enabled for Telnet or SSH. So we need to add, let's say Telnet, for example. So we go to add. For the access type, we'll select Telnet. From the LAN interface, and we're going to specify our subnet for that LAN. And of course the mask of a class C. Now let's say OK. Now, once we've got that added, we need to extend this back, go down to users AAA, and then down to AAA access. Now we're going to check Telnet, and we're going to authenticate using the local, basically the local accounts on the ASA firewall. Or even LDAP if you really want to. But we want to say local accounts. Keep that selected. Now we're done. So let's say apply. And let's go ahead and test this out. Let's go and bring up our DOS window, which is here. And it's Telnet into the ASA firewall. Great, we're connected. Let's log in. And let's log in with our enable password. Great, so our device access using Telnet, for example, is working to the ASA firewall. So let's save the configuration. So this is how you can enable Telnet or SSH access to the ASA firewall. In this video, we're going to show you how to set up a static route on the ASA firewall. So in our environment, we have many different networks that are connected off of our LAN. One of those networks is 10.67.254.0. This is basically where one of our servers, our NMS server, like our NetFlow server, basically is connected to. So in order for the ASA to connect to that particular network, we need to add a static route for it. Well, how do we do that? So very simple. First we go to configuration. Then here under the device setup, we will select routing and then static routes. Pretty much a very similar path that we did when we added our default route. So here we'll go to add. For the interface, basically we'll select the LAN interface since this network exists off of that. We'll specify the network, which is 10.67.254. with a classy subnet mask. And the next hop will be our core router, our core switch, and we'll specify that IP of being .1. Once that's created, basically we can go ahead and say OK. So now basically our static route has been created on our ASA firewall. So now we can go ahead and confirm that the static route is configured correctly and working. Once we added our static route on our ASA firewall, let's confirm that static route is working. So to do that, we can go to Tools, and let's do a ping. And let's ping our NMS server. And then down the ping here at the bottom. And we see that we can ping that server successfully. So our static route added on our firewall is working.